About, the state, it wasn't too long ago that there were labor and union laws, and I know this is a little different because now we're talking about EPA things that were forced upon us that a lot of people didn't agree with.
Right.
And it just shows that the community does have a voice at the state level if everybody can band together and make their voices heard. So I don't necessarily know that the statements that if we don't do something at the local level, then democracy isn't democracy. Democracy can be voiced at the state level as well as the local level.
I agree that it can be voiced. I'm not quite there in terms of that it can be exercised.
I think what TJ was highlighting was issue 2, SB 5.
I do hear that, and in terms of the recent collective bargaining issues, it was a remarkable situation that people did come together, and I applaud the folks in Ohio that did so. And there have been attempts elsewhere. It takes a really big issue like that to bring out such statewide outrage. Is that the best we can do? Do we have to actually have people in the streets throughout the state, and collecting signatures on, millions of signatures and the rest? Is that the access we have? Because that's how you got it. It was through the effort, and we call these civil rights ordinances, and they're not racial civil rights ordinances. They're about community rights. But we're also modeling some of the thinking and the strategy from like back in the 60s. If you think about what changed the idea, we had a legal concept in 1963. The Supreme Court of the United States had determined that it was legal for corporations like the Woolworth Corporation to refuse service to people of African American heritage. So, and that was legal. And those folks, I'm sure, went to their congressmen and went to their state legislatures. We know they did. But we also had folks sit down at lunch counters and say, "Hi, I'd like to order a sandwich." Sounds like, a tame, simple thing to do because you already know you have the rights, even if they say you don't. I'm going to act on the assumption that I have the rights. That's what this ordinance is doing. It says, I know they're violating our rights, but let's act on the assumption we already have them and force them to come out in the open and say, you don't have them. And I'm not suggesting that we want any kind of violence or harm. And this is the most benign, non-violent method. It's using the democratic process in a way to assert rights. And it's saying, if you don't believe we have these rights, come out and say it. Not because we want them to take them away from us, but because we want them. We can't actually have that bigger statewide conversation until everybody understands what the nature of the problem is. So what happened about the collective bargaining issue, folks already kind of had the sense of outrage that this was a violation of basic rights on the job. When it comes to fracking, the question of it being a violation of rights hasn't really been framed publicly. And one way to do it is to actually just act on the assertion of rights, I would suggest.
Thank you. Councilman Swires?
Yes, through the chair. Mr. Chair, I would think that somewhere in the near future we need to sit down with our local representatives, state representatives, and our state senator and just have a little bit of dialogue with them and get their feeling on the whole issue too.
Definitely, I would agree with that. Do we have questions from the other members of council that are present?
Mr. Price.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Pinker, 3rd Ward. We've probably got a statement and a question. How many municipalities in Ohio has adopted this so far?
If you do it, you'll be the first.
We will be the first. Second part.
But if I can, just to follow up, I'm probably talking to about a dozen about doing it.
Second part to this, I hear a lot about our local council, our state legislators, but I think we're discounting our federal legislatures because don't forget this whole fracking thing was invented in a secret energy policy that was developed at the federal level.
Sure.
So if we want to put pressure not only
Councilman, I don't disagree with you that the federal government is as or more complicit. The state government is as well. The industry is working hand in hand with both levels of government. And so the question for me and why we go at it this way, it's not because we think we should take the most labor-intensive track, town to town, city to city. It's because if we're going to get something started, a real movement started, to reframe, and it's not just about fracking, it's about all the other local issues that you're preempted from protecting your community from. It's all of that. If we're ever going to have that larger conversation, do you think, as a thought experiment, do you think if we took everybody in this room down to Washington and told them what we're thinking, that it would make a difference? I don't. I think that our analysis of this work, and we've been at it for a while, we've got about 140 or so communities that have adopted our ordinances that are based on rights over the years. They're not all about fracking. They're about other issues as well. But I think that there's a sense that we don't have access to those other levels of government. Even though they should be amenable to their constituents, they should be answerable to the people, they're not. And I think it's not a partisan question. This is a question of a systemic problem, and a systemic problem calls for a systemic solution. And I don't think that and I respect the history that we have. Labor history has shown that people, not just here in Ohio recently, but over the years, how did they create change? They did it where they lived. They started there and let it grow from that seed. When I took some philosophy classes in college, I learned that anything real has to actually take place somewhere in space and time, or else it's just an idea. For self-government and democracy to actually be real, it can't be an idea. It can't be the idea that we're allowed to go vote for somebody. It has to mean that the people directly affected by the governing decisions actually get to make them, or their direct representatives. Or their representatives actually represent them. I've been in any number of city council hearings of this sort, and one of the questions that arises often is, well, yeah, we live in a republic, not a democracy. Fine, if that's the way you want to define it. Now, what's a republic? There are lots of countries around the world that name themselves the People's Republic of whatever, or the Republic of whatever, and they probably have elections. The fact that you get to vote for a representative doesn't necessarily equate to having a republic. There actually has to be not only the possibility, but the reality that the outcomes sought by the people who vote for those representatives are respected and actually worked for, instead of ignored. So I think we have a mixed bag today. Unfortunately, we have a mixed bag. We have a lot of good people in office that want to do the right thing. When they get in often enough with party pressure or with existing law, they find out they can't do the things they really wanted to do. We have a systemic problem that can't be fixed by begging the people who are ignoring us to stop ignoring us. Just to put it in short term, that's how it feels. And that's from years and years of trying.
Thank you. Any other? Councilwoman Gillum?
I had a question about, I waited so long I almost forgot what it was. But I understand that fracking has been going on for over 50 years in this community. And I think what woke us up to the fracking process was because of discovery of more shale and the earthquakes. I understand also that a lot of the state we went down to the earthquake center, and I think some of the rules, regulations were not being followed. And that's how we come, to the earthquakes and some of the other things that are probably happening with the piping. I talked to some people about pipe that might be coming from China that might not be as good as the pipe, from the United States. So I think that there's a lot of things that can be done, to make this industry favorable. If not honest, I do believe they're trying to do things as cheaply as possible, and that's not right. I don't want them polluting water, but I do believe that there is a lot of things that are going on that we might not know about. But when I heard that fracking has been going on for a number of years, I was shocked by it myself.
Councilwoman, just hold on. I'm not the scientist in the room. I can only respond with the information that I've heard the same types of arguments. Sometimes it's a semantic problem. When I've heard the industry claim, no, fracking never caused contamination of an aquifer, they're using the term fracking in a different way than, say, the folks in the room are using it. Fracking, for most of the folks I've encountered, they're talking about the whole process of drilling down, going off horizontally, forcing the water under high pressure mixed in with the chemicals that they use now. Now, as I understand it, that kind of toxic mix, that cocktail of chemicals, has not been used for as long as they're claiming. There's been a process. There have been processes that deal with attempting to drill horizontally and so forth, but nothing like or on the scale of what they're doing now has been done for anything like that length of time. And so we're not always talking apples and apples when we talk about these things. So I'm not contradicting you. I think what I want to do is suggest we need to define terms more specifically, and then we might agree on more things, because as it stands, I would disagree with what your statement said.
I just want to make sure, though, we're clear that we're not going to have a technical conversation here about the process. We're talking about how it pertains to an ordinance for the city. Well,
I'm sorry, but...
Ms. Gillum?
But I still wanted to say, too, that I'm told that Pennsylvania doesn't have, they're allowing, they don't want the brine to be deposited in their state, but putting in ours, I really don't care for. There's some other things, too, we found out down at the Earthquake Center. But I do get, I would love to be in a forum where the people that are against and for, and what they can, and we can decipher between the two, like a debate between it, because we get one side or the other, we're getting bits and pieces from here, we're getting bits and pieces from there, and trying to decipher through this process is very difficult. And like, it's been said, the state has been issuing permits when we wanted to slow down, but they are steadily issuing these permits through the state.
Thank you, and with due respect, to try to answer that, having a forum or a debate between the citizens and the industry, the pro and the con kind of thing, it sounds like a reasonable thing, but let's think about it. If we're talking about this in terms of a democratic process, who decides whether it's going to happen? That would suggest to me that it's the residents of the community who sit down together and talk, not with the industry, but with each other. And just to make the parallel, when was the last time that there was a suggestion that the citizens of the communities being fracked be invited to the board meetings of the corporations engaged?
I'll have Ms. Gillum follow up, but I just want to make sure, too, we're...
Say one thing quickly.
Sure.
When I said a debate, I don't mean between the industry. I don't mean the fracking industry. Somebody that knows about the industry and who's neutral to the process, not the company.
So all members...
I know they're going to be for whatever they're saying.
I think to capture what Councilman Gillum is saying is everyone at the table to answer a question on a formative basis, not, necessarily a debate back and forth, but both parties be able to sit down and have that. Similarly to what we did in our last public utilities, forum at the Cavelli Center, was trying to, that was... It really frustrates me when people come to our meetings and this body tries to be accessible and the people ask for this meeting, and then you're going to throw that in our face. I'm sorry. I take a personal offense to the groans like that. I'm sorry, I do.
Respectfully, I talk to the folks here, so I have a little bit of a sense of things, and I think that, and the work that I do, and these kinds of ordinances that our organization puts out, they're about the community. They're not about, and when we talk about all of the folks who, the stakeholders and so forth, that's a theory that's really worked very well for the folks with the biggest clout, because they have the loudest voice. And what we don't really have, and I guess what I've heard, at least from folks in not just this community but elsewhere, is that they'd like to be the ones at the table. They don't want a place at the table. It's their community, and they'd like to actually conduct the discussion.
I would just also probably like to summarize, too, I think, conversations we've had as council, our body is frustrated as well, and I think, Councilman Gillum highlighted a little bit of that. I've used the example before with the liquor process. This body, as City Council, has more input to object to a liquor license for a store than we do for fracking or drilling of anything that's regulated at the state level. We used to have some level of control. John served for many terms, so he remembers those days. But for example, when a liquor permit comes for renewal, the Department of Commerce sends notice to the legislative body. We also send notice to the police department. Vice can go out there and inspect that at a local level, see if we have police reports on that, and we have a 30-day period to respond or request a hearing for that. I mean, it's very frustrating when we have no level. It's either all or nothing with this, and putting this on the table means it's nothing, and we don't even have the rights as the local government to have any piece of this is extremely frustrating for us, I would say. I think my colleagues probably would share my sentiments on that.
And we feel the same. In Pennsylvania, matter of fact, we put together a history of preemption in the state, and it goes from liquor issues to mining to water to GMO seeds to everything, where there's been a clear stripping away of what you might have exercised as local control. So it's not like it's a mistake or just they left it out. There's a clear move away from local and towards centralized government, which is not really, does not comport with the idea of representation or democracy.
Thank you. Also, I think, Councilman Raj mentioned to me too, and I think something else that Councilman Gillum was saying was, a forum like this or informational meetings are something we should continue to do and make sure that all parties, be it whether we agree with them or not, have a seat at the table to make their cases so we can make an informed decisions going forward. And we don't always have those forums, so making sure that we do have that. Any other questions from members of council that are present? John, TJ? Nope. Good. At this time, we're going to entertain questions from the floor, so if you could, Dr. Ray, if you want to state your name and ask your question. Again, the questions we're only entertaining questions directed towards Ben. Council's not asking questions, and they're informational questions regarding this piece of legislation. This is an informational meeting.
I understand that. Okay. Hi, my name is Ray Beiersdorfer. I'm a professor of geology and environmental sciences at YSU. I think many of you know me. I actually did want to address something that Annie said about this whole issue about information and And I just want to point out that I heard...
Again, I don't want to get in a debate here.
Okay, no, I'm not going to debate.
Or statements.
Okay.
We need to,
Okay,
we build this meeting publicly as an informational
Right.
meeting
Okay, great.
on this, and we
Okay.
need to stay within those constraints. I don't mean to, we have...
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to preface what I was going to say, but if you want me to go right to it. I actually want to sort of assert through the chair, what my good friend John Squires said, where he took a survey of us. I would like to take a survey of the council members here, and my survey is, how much have you done to educate yourself about the risks of fracking? And I'd like you to answer that, or if not, to say that, no, I think I need to be well educated, and I want to offer my services to help to educate you about the risk of fracking, particularly Annie's misinformation about the timing of this. So, John, you were able to ask us, so I just want to ask you.
That was a general question to ask. I'm not going to answer that, sir. I do read the material in front of me, but I think the chair should speak for all of us.
Okay, great.
At this point, though, again, I asked, and please don't pull there. We can't have we need to stay orderly here, so if you could try to... I don't want to have, then the body cannot see. Again, we want to ask questions on this legislation towards the draft of this legislation, and that's...
Okay, well, to make informed decisions about this legislation, you do need information and education. And so I wasn't going to ask it because I had written it down before we started. You said we couldn't, but I thought since my friend John asked the question of us, that we should be entitled to ask a question of you. Could you explain to me the rules or why that's not possible?
Well, this is, again, we specify this as an informational meeting to answer questions regarding this piece of legislation, and we want to stay on that topic.
All right. But why could John ask us a question then that wasn't to Ben and wasn't about the fracking? Could you explain that?
I'm not going to have a debate on that. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying to stick towards this.
Okay.
You
all
want
right.
a general,
well,
you want to take a
okay,
polling
great.
to know who we're representing in the room,
Okay,
if
great.
in fact it's
So,
city residents, and I think that's a fair question to ask.
Okay. All right. Now, he has two questions as well. But, okay, so Ben, do you think it would be a good idea if a YSU professor would offer his services to educate the city council about the dangers to the health and the environment of fracking? Yes or no?
I defer to the community on who they turn to for advice, but certainly members of the community, from my point of view and the work that we do as a member of the community and with special knowledge of the issue, I think that would certainly be a valuable piece of input.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman Ray, I want to thank you very, very much for attending the Citizens Rights-Based Ban meeting on April 26th that was held in, was it Akron? And I would like to thank my lawyer, Jim Callan, for attending the Citizens Rights-Based Ban meeting in Akron. They had to spend their own time, and they had to drive over there, and they had to meet with people who were equally frightened of losing their rights to breathing clean air and drinking clean water. And I wanted to thank Mike Ray, Jim Callan. Now, my question to Ben Price. Thank you, Ben Price, for the very eloquent speech. You have really helped us. You've enlightened us. The community, the citizens are galvanized. The citizens are going to fight for their right to breathe clean air and drink clean water and have clean land. And what my question is given this masterful citizens' rights-based ban, it's a beautiful piece of work written by you and Jim Callan, my lawyer.
By my organization, not just
Your
me.
organization, I know you are not an attorney, but when I called for lawyers, guns, and money, I got you, and I thank you. We are fighting for our lives here in Youngstown. We have a toxic load that's egregious. We have brownfields that are Superfund sites. We have a coal-fired thermal plant that wafts, smoke over us. We've got heavy metals wells in every lake, and our Mahoning River cannot be cleaned unless we come up with a $94 million match to remove the heavy metals. We have a metro park ringed with slant-drilled wells that the deep drilling rights are in the process of being flipped to Total E&P of France, and I think my lawyer is now having to sue the attorneys because we have had a dry up of the public records that I have been able to get with the Ohio Sunshine Law's public records requests. So my question to you, the citizens' will be done. So when legislators are, unable, their hands are tied by a drill baby drill governor, and we have possibly an executive director of a park possibly placed by the drill baby drill governor. These people are not listening. They are not, for various reasons, fear, mostly fear. So we had a citizens' rights-based ban document, which we are ready to adopt. We are more than ready to protect ourselves because the state isn't doing it for us. So what's our next step?
It depends.
I think that's there are other ways aside from, going to this body as legislators ask them to adopt it is one of the ways that obviously being exercised, and we're doing our job as looking at this.
Sure, and I think that that's the approach, at least as I see it, that's coming to the committee is a beginning of that process to ask if the City Council will work with the community to enact such a law. And yes, there's certainly some language that can be tweaked or prohibitions added in terms of those types of things. I think that it means I think that, I put it this way, the community can't lose as long as it doesn't quit.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you win fast, but you can't lose if you don't quit. And there are other avenues. You've got a community that has a city charter. You have the ability to
referendum.
Yeah, referendum. You have the ability of the community members to place a question before your neighbors to vote on. There's certainly options if the majority of the city council were, not able to come to agreement on adoption of a community rights ordinance banning fracking practices, then there is another option. And that's, by the way, that's an example of democracy that I think is great. It's something that was fought for in the early 20th century when municipalities were being really, not like they're not now, but really dumped on by special legislation at the state level, where they would just pass a law just to govern Youngstown at the state level and say, we're going to let the railroad run their engine down